The first saints that I covered, each of them, they all had some very mischievous, deep flaws, right? The saints that I'm covering today are not like them. In fact, they're more legend than actual, yeah. So I'll cover them. And how much of these saints do we really know? Yeah, as Bill said, a lot of it is written in what we call holy writings, hagiography, but not really historical documents.
But it's important what people believe, just as much as what is.
Oh yeah, oh definitely. Oh, what was I looking at today? Oh, yesterday. Oh, I was working on the my new sermon series, and I was going through various scripture. And one of the stories that I'll be using for one of the Sundays is a scripture text that I'm sure many people have heard before. But if you read it in the Bible, it's in these double brackets. And it's in these double brackets because, and it says on the subscript on the bottom of most Bibles, that ancient manuscripts, a lot of the older manuscripts are missing this passage. It's from the Gospel of John, and it's the story of where they bring in the woman caught in the middle of adultery, right? And then they bring her in, and they want to stone her, and then they ask Jesus, "What should we do with her?" Right? And he stoops down and starts writing things on the sand. You guys all know that story, right? Well, that story particularly is in double brackets. And it says some manuscripts don't include that story. And so there's always been this debate whether that story is true or not, just because it's in that double bracket. But if you actually look at the historical, the ancient history of that story, the only part of that story that scholars would say that is not true is the fact that it's in the Gospel of John. The placement, because when you talk about manuscripts, we have hundreds of these manuscripts, and scholars do a very rigorous job trying to figure out which is authentic, which is not, and all of that. And that particular story, there's only one other passage in the New Testament that is controversial as that story, and that is actually the ending of the Gospel of Mark. Most scholars believe that the last part of Gospel of Mark shouldn't be there. It was written by someone else later on. But the story in the Gospel of John, the one that I'm telling you about, that story predates the Gospel of John. And that's why, and all the different manuscripts, the reason why it's, it kind of stands out as people saying the authenticity of that story is questionable is because it moves around. Half or a good number of ancient manuscripts don't have it. A whole bunch of manuscripts have it earlier in the chapter. It's in chapter 7 or chapter 8. Some people, a lot of it have it in the early part of the chapter, middle of the chapter, end of the chapter. So it moves around in the chapter. And in some manuscripts, it's in completely different chapters. So it moves around. And in some manuscripts, you have the whole Gospel of John without that passage, and then it's tacked on at the end as an appendix. So the question is, okay, because the story keeps on moving around, some scholars say, well, this story must not be true because it's not consistent. But the flipped argument is actually is a stronger argument, which is this story is actually more true than the other parts of the Gospel of John. And the fact that it moves around is because the story has existed through oral tradition, and everyone knew about it, and they had to put it somewhere. And so they had to place it somewhere, and that's why it moved around. But the story itself is actually more authentic than the Gospel of John, because the Gospel of John, as most people know, is more editorial than synoptic. So anyhow.
What's the earliest manuscript
So the traditional understanding of when it was written was at the end of the first century, around 90, 95. But the earliest manuscript, it's not that late. It's the earliest one is about 200, mid second century. Yeah, so there are fragments of them. Fragments, and that's the problem because you have all these fragments, and they piece it together throughout. The interesting thing about the New Testament is that the earliest manuscripts of the Old Testament, before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right? So Dead Sea Scrolls were found, right on about the first century BC, right? Right before the time of Jesus. But before the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, which was only found back in 1946, right? Yeah. Was 5th century. 5th century. So that you're talking over 500 years. So besides the Dead Sea Scrolls, the earliest manuscripts of the Old Testament is 500 years after that. The New Testament, we have a lot more manuscripts of the New Testament that are earlier. So a lot of the New Testament manuscripts are around the 2nd century. We don't have the originals, but we have a whole bunch of the copies of New Testament manuscripts. In fact, of all the ancient documents, ancient writings, the only other, there's more copies of the New Testament as ancient manuscripts than any other writing in history. The second most copy is Homer, right? As an ancient manuscript, there's about 1,000 copies of Homer, right, as ancient manuscripts. Do you know how many copies of the New Testament is around? Almost 6,000. So there's a huge difference in the number of manuscripts that floats around of the New Testament versus any other type of writing. So,
classical manuscripts were destroyed.
yes, and again, and the classical stories get destroyed, and that's why during one of the saints that I talked about, Saint, what was his name? Saint. Who did I do? I did Jerome. Yeah, Anselm wasn't Anselm. Who's the other one that I did early on? One of the saints. Oh, no, not one of the saints. One of the.
You did Augustine, didn't you?
I did Augustine. Gregory. It was one of the orders. Franciscan order. I didn't do Dominique. Who's the other? Benedict. The Benedictine monks. The Benedictine monks are attributed as, it's because of the Benedictine monks we have so many of the ancient biblical manuscripts. Because during all the wars during history, the Benedictine monk, and again, Benedict, Saint Benedict is the patron saint of scholars. And yeah, and so one of the callings of the Benedictine monks is to preserve ancient manuscripts even at the cost of their lives. Yeah, so when all these wars happen throughout history, and buildings are being burned, and you have these rampage of war, they would risk their lives, gather these manuscripts, and escape with them. Yeah. So anyhow, so today we are going to conclude our time studying the saints, and we're going to look at some of the common saints and some of the common saints that we hear about all the time because we live in cities with their names and kind of get to know their stories. Let's join together in prayer. Oh, gracious, loving God, we give you thanks as we come together this evening and as we wrap up our series in looking at the various saints in our lives and who have set examples for us. Lord, we pray for your Spirit to guide us and be with us. inspire us. May your Spirit open up our hearts and our minds to glean from these saints stories and their lives that impact the world in which we live today. So be with us, and may your Spirit always be our guide. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. So again, we'll be looking at some of the common saints, and you can see, so today we're going to look at, again, two of them probably more, very famous saints, and I kind of gravitated to these two primarily because of the date. We're kind of approaching their feast dates. Well, at least one of them. The other one, of course, St. Nicholas. Do you know when the feast date of St. Nicholas is?
December 6th.
Oh, there you go. I have that here? Yeah. Oh, I do have it. Oh. All right, fine. Oh, and I didn't even finish the statement. Patron saint of. If you say Christmas, it's wrong. He's not the patron saint of Christmas, but close. I'll get to that. All right. So Saint Nicholas. So Saint Nicholas was born. Again, he is, of course, the story. The life of Saint Nicholas is it gives the inspiration for the story of Santa Claus, which you know is not.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we'll just leave that as is. Okay. But Saint Nicholas is actually a Greek bishop, from the city of Patara, which is in modern-day Turkey. Again, Saint Nicholas, his dates are very early. You're talking 3rd century, 4th century, 4th century. And because it's so early, not much is actually known about him other than legends. There are a few writings in the hagiography, which are the holy writings that a lot of these saints we get their stories. But Saint Nicholas, there's not that, even in all the writings, when we say hagiographies, these are usually written by the church. These are official writings of the church. They're not necessarily historical writings, but they're faith stories of the church. In terms of St. Nicholas, there's more folktale or legends of St. Nicholas than actual writings in hagiographies. So what do we know about him? Again, not much is known. We know that he comes from a very wealthy family of Greek Christians. There's confusions about who his parents are. There's different stories. We don't know, so we don't even know who his parents are. But one of the common threads of all the stories is that his uncle was a bishop. It was the uncle of Myra, was the bishop of Myra at one point. So he had that faith growing up. According to the legends, his parents died early during an epidemic, a pandemic of some sort. And he was orphaned. But because his family was very wealthy, he had a lot of means. Now, what do you do when you have rich parents and they die, a tragic death, whatnot, and you're orphaned with all this money? You can either become Batman, right? You know the story of Batman, right? His parents were really wealthy and he decided to, anyhow. But Nicholas didn't do that. He didn't become Batman, or maybe he became Santa Claus. Anyhow, he decides he's just going to give the money away. Okay, so he distributes his family's wealth to the poor. He distributes the money to the poor. No, there's some, right there. But not only that, again, one of the primary legend stories of Saint Nicholas is the story of the 3 daughters. And this is how the legend goes. So one day, Nicholas, again, he's distributing his wealth to the poor and so forth. He comes across a man, a very devout man, who was once wealthy, but lost all his money due to, and according to the legend story, quote, quote, plotting and the envy of Satan. What does that mean? Somehow, for some reason, the plotting and the envy of Satan, he loses all his money. So Nicholas comes across this man who used to be wealthy but no longer is, and that man has 3 daughters. And the biggest concern that this father has is for his daughters. Without the wealth, the daughter, he is not able to marry them off. He's not able to pay the proper dowry for them to be wed properly. And so the concern that this man had was that his daughters, because he would not be able to properly send them off to marriage, that they would be forced into prostitution, which was the common thing back then. If daughters or women who do not have familial support, the only way of means is through prostitution. We'll get to that story when we do the whole Les Miserables story starting this Sunday. Anyhow, so what does Nicholas do? He hears this story and he's moved by this plight of not just the father, but of the daughters. And so upon hearing this story, Nicholas decides to help them, but secretly. Now, why secretly? Some say it's because Nicholas was very modest. Again, he didn't want to flaunt his wealth. He was giving it away. So in one sense, he didn't want to be seen as one who's just helping people, or just, he didn't want to be known for the one who's saving them. Other stories say that he wanted to help this family secretly because he didn't want this family to feel that they were receiving charity. In many sense, that second interpretation has a much more noble character to it, right? Sometimes when you help people, yes, we are helping them, but sometimes we have that Superman syndrome of, oh, we are helping them. And we don't really think about how the people who are receiving it, kind of feel. Yes, they're grateful, but also there's also that sense of, oh, they're receiving charity, right? And so because of that, he wanted to help them in secret. And so if you look at that picture kind of tells that story. So, yeah, I guess if you don't know the story, he looks like some sort of I don't know, throwing baseballs into someone's window. No. So what Nicholas does, he goes to the house under the cover of night, right? Because he wants to do it in secret, and threw a purse filled with gold coins. Those are coins, not baseballs, again, into the window. All right? So he's throwing gold coins into the window. So the first night he does this, the father immediately arranges marriage for his oldest daughter. All right? So sends the first one off. Now, after the wedding, Nicholas, again, goes to the house in the cover of night and throws a second bag of gold coins. And the father, of course, then, immediately, before he squanders the money away, arranges for a second marriage, or not second marriage, but a marriage for his second daughter. But after that, this man, the father, he doesn't know where this money is coming from, right? And he wants to know who is throwing this, bag of gold coins into his window. So right after the marriage of his second daughter, he stays up all night for a couple nights, wondering who this is. And he catches St. Nicholas in the act. Right? And when he finds St. Nicholas, he immediately falls to his knees and give thanks, right? Out of gratitude. And asks what he can do to repay such gratitude. And Nicholas says to him, let's blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Nicholas says, the father falls in, and Nicholas orders him that what he can do to repay for the gratitude, right, is to not tell anyone, to keep it a secret. Okay? Sounds like a great story, doesn't it? That story is what gives, that is the story that lends to St. Nicholas. The whole Christmas, Santa Claus story comes from that legend. How's, huh?
Did the third daughter?
He didn't honor the NDA because we know the story.
Right.
Yeah, now we know the story, right? But that is how that came about, and of course, yes. Nicholas, again, for his compassion for the daughters, does this. After he, helps this family and gives, he kind of distributes his money or all the wealth to the poor. Another legend says that Nicholas is said to have visited the Holy Land. Okay, so after distributing his wealth, he then goes to the Holy Land for his own spiritual growth. On the trip to Bethlehem, okay, to go to Holy Land, and he wants to go to Bethlehem, he's on a ship that is almost destroyed in a storm. Okay, but Nicholas, legend has it that Nicholas got up, rebuked the storm, and guess what happened? The waves subsided. Where did we hear that story before? Right? It's almost like very similar to the story of Jesus. When Nicholas arrived in Palestine, he had already given away all his money, his own wealth, right? So he doesn't have a place to stay or to live. So he goes to the place of Jesus' birth, and he resides in a crib next to the Nativity. All right? And so he becomes tied to the birth story of Jesus. That's how the Christmas story came about. There is a church today, just on the outside walls. So now there's the Church of Nativity, which recognizes, where they say, this is the place where, Jesus was born. There's actually a stone there that you can go down to the basement and you can touch the stone. They said that's where the cattle lay, and that's where the manger was. But next to it, on the outside of the walls, there is a church, the Church of St. Nicholas. Yeah, it's there. Back page.
The children put out their wooden shoes for treats on Christmas. And
Right, that's another story, but not the traditional or the St. Nicholas, story. So anyhow, after his stay in the Holy Land, he returns back to Myra, where his hometown is. And when he comes back to Myra, I'm forgetting to. So this is an iconography where there's like different stories of his life on that. Unfortunately, most iconographies are vertical, so it's hard to show it on the stuff. I guess I could have zoomed in. Anyhow, so there's different stories in there. There's the story of the calming of the storm. You see the one with the boat, right? The one with and there's multiple stories of through his generosity of giving his wealth. There's also healing stories as gifts. So there's all of that. Anyhow, after staying in the Holy Land, he returns back to Myra. And when he returns back to Myra, the bishop of... so after his uncle was bishop and the uncle died, there was another bishop in Myra who had just died. And the priests of Myra decided, in a very scientific way, that the next person that walks into the church they're going to make him bishop. Right? Yeah, no, forget the white smoke and all. So it just so happens that Nicholas arrives and he goes to the church to pray that morning, not having any intentions of doing whatever. Right? Again, he had, his life is just, okay, his parents die, he gives away the money, he comes across this, father, he gives, provides for their means, goes to Bethlehem, hangs around the Church of the Nativity, or the Church of the Nativity wasn't around, Bethlehem, comes back, and then he walks into the church, and he becomes bishop. As bishop, it wasn't an easy life. In fact, during the time of Nicholas's, there it is, by chance. During the time of Nicholas's role as bishop, the emperor of Rome at the time, Diocletian, was very much anti-church. And so he imprisons St. Nicholas for many years. In fact, he is imprisoned from, what was it? I forgot how many years. But basically, during Diocletian's reign, St. Nicholas is in jail and is only released after Emperor Constantine converts to Christianity at 312 AD. So you're talking over 20 years, or something like 20 years. Nicholas is in prison. He comes out, and another ancient story, legend, is that St. Nicholas was actually at the Council of Nicaea that Constantine gathers. So Constantine gathers all the bishops for the Council of Nicaea, where during the Council of Nicaea they debate who Jesus is, right? The identity of Jesus, whether Jesus is fully God or fully human, that whole concept. One of the arguments. Okay. One of the arguments at the Council of Nicaea was this concept of Arianism. And Arianism believes that Jesus was 100% God, but not human. And that the whole crucifixion was an illusion. Right? Well, Nicholas he didn't like that. And he got into a fight with Arius to the point where he actually punched Arius out. So Santa Claus gets into a fight and punches out Arius, and because of that, he was dismissed from the council. And so even though he was at the Council of Nicaea, there is no documents that list his attendance because of that. So these are all legend stories. But given all that, St. Nicholas is known, again, because of his travels to the Holy Land. He is the patron saint of travelers. In fact, that picture right there is a picture of the Church of St. Nicholas on the path of Camino de Santiago. So when I was walking from there to there, yes, one of the rest stops is the Church of St. Nicholas. He greets you at the city of Puerto Marin, and it's one of the places where you get your stamp that you're actually walking and not calling taxi. So that's St. Nicholas. So again, he is the patron saint of not Christmas. He is the patron saint of travelers, of children, right, because of his care for the daughters. He's the patron saint of sailors, calming of the storm, right, of merchants, and toy makers. Gifts, yeah.
How about boxers?
Oh, boxing. Patron saint of boxing. Yeah. His feast day is December 6th, not December 25th. It's December 6th because that is the date of his death. He was born on, tradition says, he was born on March 15th, which is coming up. Okay? Yeah. So speaking of March, there's another saint that's closely attributed to March. And who is that? Okay, so St. Patrick, right? St. Patrick, his feast day is, of course, March 17th. So St. Patrick was born Maywin Sukkot, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. He's basically was born, he's actually, it doesn't sound British, but he was born in Britain, in England, I guess. So St. Patrick was born Maywin Sukkot in Britain around 386 AD. So 386, so again, 4th century, during the end of the Roman rule of the British Isles. Okay. Now his father was actually he comes from a upper class, very wealthy home. A lot of these saints come from wealthy homes, yet many of them dismiss their wealth, right? Just like what St. Nicholas did. So Patrick, and again, his name, Patrick, was given to him when he began his religious journey, because his name has nothing to do with Patrick, right? His father was a senator and a tax collector for the Roman Empire. So he was a nobleman in the Romano-British city. He was also a deacon of the church, in other words, ordained high official. His grandfather was a priest. Okay, so he does have that faith background. But even though his father was a deacon in the church and his grandfather was a priest, Patrick writes, he has extensive writings. He indicates that the home that he grew up in was not very religious. Religion wasn't something that was forced upon him. And so he himself says that he wasn't an active believer in Christianity until later on in his youth. And there's a story behind that. And not only that, but education. Again, education was closely tied to the Christian faith. Because education, where did you go to receive an education? Monasteries, the church, right? It's the church structure that provides the education. So one of his grievances, or he does in one of his writings, state that the fact that because education wasn't stressed during his younger years, that he always had that inferiority complex, that he felt embarrassed. A source of embarrassment was the fact that he didn't receive proper education as a young child. And one of the reasons that was because he actually has a very tragic early life. At the age of 16, okay. At the age of 16, he was captured by Irish pirates. And he was sold into slavery. Okay? Oh, sounds like the story of Joseph, right? See, the Bible stories, they're just not ancient stories. They just repeat itself throughout history. So at the age of 16, he is sold into slavery by Irish pirates. And he was sold to a high priest of Druidism. Okay, he's a pagan, Celtic right? It's that Irish pagan religion. A priest of that as well. So basically, he was sold into slavery and had to work as a slave through his upper teenage years under this priest. And because of that, his job was to tend sheep and things like that. But because of his enslavement, the way Patrick looked upon that was he viewed his enslavement as a test of faith from God. And so it was during his years in captivity, and he lived as a slave for 6 years, from 16 to 22. He became devoutly devoted to Christianity. Not because he went to a monastery to learn, not because he studied under a great teacher, but because of the hardships of being in slavery, that he reflected upon the Christian faith, looked at the pagan practices, and it drove him to a constant act of prayer. He writes in his writings that he devoted himself to constant prayer, which gave him the strength to continue. He saw the children, the children of pagan Ireland reaching. He has a vision and in this vision, he sees the children of the Irish children of the pagan practices reaching out their hand to him in a vision. And that gave him the inspiration or the calling that his role was to share the Christian faith to these Irish children. After 6 years of slavery, in 408 AD, he receives a vision. And the vision is that he would be free soon. But not because, something happens and he's released. He actually has to run away. So he finds a way, he escapes his captor, runs away to a port where he persuades the sailors to allow him to get on board that ship. Now, a common theme here, anytime you get on a ship back in those days, there's always going to be a storm and a shipwreck. Always. Whether you're the Apostle Paul or you're the disciples on the Sea of Galilee, there's always a storm. So the ship gets, after being sailing for about 3 days, it gets lost. And they they run aground, not necessarily a full shipwreck, but they end up having to abandon ship. And he spends the next 28 days in the wilderness, trying to figure out where they are. During that time, 28 days, they don't have food, and they don't have means, and they're very hungry. And again, what Patrick has learned during his years of enslavement is, no matter what hardship, pray. And so he leads the others to pray, and as he prays, there is a herd of pigs that just happen to go their way. They have a feast. After 28 days of wandering in the wilderness, he finally finds their way. They cover over 200 miles and eventually finds his way back home to Britain. After being freed and being restored, he then goes to get proper education. And so he does so by going to France to study and to become a priest. Under the guidance of a missionary Saint Germanus. And he is ordained in 418 AD. I don't have that, but in 418 AD, he becomes ordained as a priest. But as time goes by, during his studies, he forgets about Ireland, right? And the conviction that he had. Until in 432 AD, he's then become ordained bishop, And the Pope at that time, Pope Celestine I, decides to send Patrick to all places, Ireland, to spread Christianity. And that's when he was like, oh, I remember what I'm supposed to do. Just all kind of works out, right? So then he realized, oh yeah, I need to go back to Ireland. So he goes to Ireland, but initially when he tries to share the gospel as, not as a slave, but now he is the bishop there, he encounters strong resistance, where they refuse to even listen to him and persecutions. Well, what he then decides, he realizes that instead of trying to fight their culture, he does something different. He decides to incorporate their culture. So St. Patrick, what he does is, again, initially he had that strong resistance to the Christian faith by the Irish, but he recognizes, because he knew, those 6 years that he spent in slavery, he now saw it as a gift, as a tool for him to connect with the people of Ireland. He understood their pagan practices. He understood their rituals. And he then starts to combine together, not completely reject the pagan practices and rituals, but combine them together. The practices, and one of the things that he, that's a sign of how he was able to link the pagan Celtic practices with Christianity is the Celtic cross. Right? Celtic cross. I don't have a picture of that. You guys know how that looks? It's a cross with a circle around it. The circle represents the sun god or the sun worship of the Celtic practices, and the cross. So he basically combines them together. And many of the legends and the stories of how he was able to break through and connect with the Irish people was being able to make use of the things that were part of the Irish culture. The shamrock, right? Well, the shamrock has, and we do this in children's time, right? It's commonly used as a way of teaching the Trinity. Well, the story is that St. Patrick did the same thing. That the number 3 in the Celtic pagan tradition is that the number 3 was already a divine number. And so what St. Patrick did was saying, well, you know what? I know why it's a divine number. Let me tell you about these 3 aspects of divinity. And so he used the shamrock, and so uses that as a teaching of the Trinity. In another story, okay, so again, St. Patrick of Ireland, his feast day is March 17th. That's when he died in 461 AD. There's a cool story. Hold on, it's here somewhere. In one of the stories, St. Patrick visits an inn, okay? And he notices that the innkeeper at this inn was very not kind to the guests there. So he goes up to the innkeeper and says, your rudeness or unkindness, all that's doing is it's feeding a demon. There's a demon that's residing down in the cellar of your inn, and that demon is feeding off your dishonesty and your rudeness. Okay? He says that, and then he goes off. Some months later, he comes back to this inn, and he finds that this innkeeper has completely changed her ways. She is kind, and she's going around filling everyone's whiskey glass to the brim, right? So she's no longer stingy about the whiskey, right? She's filling it to the brim. And so because of that, Patrick praises her generosity and then invites her to go down to the cellar with him. Now, at first, she's very apprehensive. Like, why would I want to go down to the cellar? Well, what's usually kept in the cellars? Huh? Whiskey, right? That's where the barrels are. So anyhow, he goes down to takes her down to the cellar, and legend has it that when they went down there, they found a demon that had withered away, right? And with the demon being withered away, all those barrels of whiskey then became available, and so then they celebrated by everyone having a glass of whiskey. So on his feast day, March 17th, now you understand why it's Irish whiskey. You celebrate St. Patrick by pouring yourself a tall glass of whiskey.
What's the story of the snakes? The snakes were on a picture.
Yes, snakes. So now this one I didn't really want to include because there's so.
Exactly.
So the story is, and again, these are legends, right? Is that when St. Patrick was in Ireland, and in a way to connect with the people of Ireland, so the legend has it is that St. Patrick prayed, was attacked by snakes and whatever, and prayed for Ireland to be freed of snakes, right? And so he's the patron saint of snakes, which doesn't make sense because then he got rid of all the snakes. Now, the funny part of that story is geographers, right, attest that Ireland never had snakes. So how can Patrick get rid of all the snakes if they never were snakes, right? Unless the snakes were of the metaphorical kind, right? Snakes represent Satan. And so by bringing Christianity into Ireland, he got rid of Satan. Yeah, and that is the snakes. Anyhow, okay. We're going to go through a couple quick ones here. And these are the stories of our famous city. So Southern California, we are full of saints. This past Sunday, we sang, for all the saints come marching in, right? And we're part of Greater Los Angeles, which is the city of. All right. So so some of our closest cities, right? Santa Barbara.
Saint of prisoners.
It's
Isn't she the saint of prisoners?
Saint of prisoners.
No?
Hold on.
That's what they told me at the mission in Santa Barbara.
Sort of. Could be. There's a tie-in. So it's attributed to Saint Barbara, of course, and she's a martyr. So she died, and she was a 3rd century. So the story about Saint Barbara is that she was a daughter of a rich pagan, again, non-Christian pagan, named Dioscorus, whatever, who was overly protective of her. She was very beautiful, but she didn't. So the father was very protective of her beauty and didn't want anyone to know, to be able to, see her, I guess. So he kept her locked up. So the ancient, the patron saint of prisoners, it kind of has a tie-in there. Yeah. So she was locked up in a tower to preserve her beauty from the outside world. Does this sound like? It's a Rapunzel story, right? While locked up, however, she becomes a Christian. Now, how she became a Christian, it's kind of hard to know. But what the legend says is that she deduced that the old pagan gods were hollow imitations, and therefore became familiar with the teachings of Christ. Not that anyone had taught her, that she kind of opened up to understanding the way of Christ. After becoming a Christian, she rejected, or before she actually became a Christian, she rejected an offer of marriage. So even though the father had locked her up away from anyone else, he had arranged for her to for a prosperous marriage, which she rejected, right? So the father was not happy, but he had to go away again on a trip. And in order for her to be locked up and not have to engage with others, because apparently even though she was in the tower, she did have some connections. How else would she hear about Christianity? So what he does is he builds her a private bathhouse so that she can go. Apparently, when she went to the public bathhouse, that's where she was exposed to others. So she builds her a private bathhouse that is in her dwelling, so in the tower, connected to a bathhouse, so that she would be even more isolated. Well, Barbara asked that the bathhouse have 3 windows. The tradition is to build it with 2 windows, but she wanted it with 3 windows. Now, why was that? Because she wanted the bathhouse not to be just a place where you take a bath, but a place where you get baptized. And so the 3 windows represented the Trinity. And so she secretly, again, without telling the father, planned to, so that when they created this bathhouse, she ended up creating it into a church-like, a place, and then she secretly had arranged for her to be baptized before her father came back. So now she became Christian. As soon as the father returned, she declared that she is a Christian and not a pagan, and that she is devoting her life to not a nunnery, but yeah. And her father, being so mad at her, drags her in front of the prefect and had her tortured, brutally tortured. But at night, anytime she went back to her tower and she took a bath in the bathhouse, her wounds would miraculously be healed. Right? Finally, however, the father becomes so upset at her that he condemns her to death by beheading. And he does the act himself.
Oh my goodness.
So he beheads her, and in the act of after beheading Barbara, as a punishment, on his way home, he is struck by lightning and consumed by fire.
Good.
So that's the legend. Yeah, he's like, good for him.
Where does that supposedly all take place?
Oh, this is, she lives in, I believe, is it Spain or Italy? I don't have it here. Not here.
No, but I mean, some of it sounds like some of the places we saw in Spain, where they have the bathhouses down in.
Oh, there you go, yeah.
The towers.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Sounds kind of Spanish.
I think it is Spanish because, oh, here we go. So her feast day is December 4th. Now, why is it December 4th, right? That's the day that she died. But Santa Barbara, the reason why Santa Barbara is then associated with Saint Barbara is because the channel, Santa Barbara Channel, was discovered by a Spanish explorer, Sebastian Vizcaino, on December 4th, 1602. And therefore, that is why that channel, and thus then the city, is named after Saint Barbara because it was discovered on her feast day. Yeah.
Before Father Sarah got there.
Yes, before Father Sarah got there. All right. Saint Rose of Lima. Now, what is named after Saint Rose of Lima? Santa Rosa. Now, who is Santa Rosa? So Santa Rosa was born Isabel Flores de Olivia, on April 20th, 1586. She was born of a noble family in the city of Lima in Peru. She was one of 11 children to a cavalry soldier of the Imperial Spanish Army. The reason why she went by the name Rose, even though her name was Isabel, was because when she was an infant, a servant claimed that the servant saw her face transform into a rose. And so then after that, from infancy, she was nicknamed Rose. As a young girl, she lived with a life of strong devotion, right? Fasting 3 times a week and performing severe penance in secret. Okay? So from a young age, she was just very devout in that sense. Even to the point where apparently she was very beautiful. In fact, some images of her, which I didn't include, it's like a Madonna type of image, right? Very beautiful, but she despised her beauty. Whenever when she realized that the men were admiring her beauty, she cut her hair and rubbed pepper on her face. She became upset when men noticed her. She rejected all suitors against the will of her family. And she spent her life instead devoted to helping the sick and the hungry in our community. And she sewed, and in order to do that, she was very skillful in needlework. And so she would sell her needlework and grew flowers in her garden and sold them in the market in order to raise funds to help the poor. She spent her life doing that. She wanted to become a nun, but her father forbade her from becoming a nun. Instead, she entered the Order of St. Dominic and basically devoted her entire life to just helping the poor. Legend has it that she only sleeps 2 hours a night so that she could spend more time in prayer. Yeah, I know. I tried to do that. And yeah, if you try to pray that much, sleep just comes around. Anyhow, she died on August 24th, or 23rd, 24th, 1617, at the age of 31. Why do you think so? Because because of her reluctance on her own beauty, instead she fostered flowers and things like that. In fact, she's the patron saint of gardening and things like that, embroidery. She neglected her own body. So at the age of 31, before the age of 31, she became very ill, and after a long illness, died. And the thing about another legend says that she prophesied the day of her death, or the date of her death. So she prophesied years before the day that she would die, and she did so. She is the first person born in the Americas to be canonized as a saint. Yeah. And so again, as Saint Patrick is the patron saint of Ireland, Santa Rosa is the patron saint of the Americas. Okay. Now, somebody think, was it America? Well, do you know who the patron saint of America, as in the United States of America, is? Saint Mary. Yeah, that was just designated not too long ago by Pope. Not the last one. Not Francis, not Benedict, John Paul. I was going to say, who was that before? So, basically they designated Saint Mary, which Santa Maria is Saint Mary, as the patron saint of the United States, but the Americas, it's Santa Rosa because she is the first saint born in the Americas. All right? Another city that we have near us, St. Louis Obispo, right? Now, who is he named after? Saint Louis, right? This is not the This is not the same St. Louis as the city in Missouri, right? That city, St. Louis, is named after the King of France, right? Louis the Ninth, King Louis the Ninth, who, by the way, is the only French king to be canonized as a saint. But that's a different guy. St. Louis Obispo was named after, usually when you have Saint blah blah of a city, it's usually the city. It could be either their birth, it could be usually where they did their ministry, or where they did their studies, depending on what kind of saint they were. For St. Louis, he was born. His name was Louis of Anjou. He was a prince. He was a Neapolitan prince. And later on became a Catholic bishop. His father, Charles, was the king of Naples back in the 13th century, 1285. But the father, King Charles, not the current one, King Charles, his father, king of Naples, was taken prisoner in Italy during the war with the king of Aragon at the time. And Louis, and his brothers were placed under the care of a Franciscan friar, during which time he studied the philosophies and the theology, and he became very much interested in that. When his father died, he was to become the heir of the throne, to become the new king. But he went home, but he instead of doing so, he went to Rome, and he gave up all claims to the throne and instead took up the Franciscan vow of poverty, chastity, and obedience. So again, there's that pattern, right, where a lot of these saints grow up with a lot of means and they dismiss it and take up this vow of poverty. And so he spent the rest of his life, he becomes a bishop and spends all his time feeding the poor, caring for serving the poor, feeding the hungry, and ignoring his own needs. After 6 months of doing that, he's exhausted. And he abandons his post as bishop. And shortly afterwards, he dies at the age of 23. I know. Now you know St. Louis Obispo. Not a happy story. He's the patron saint of iconography. Not quite sure why. I couldn't find any stories that really tied that in. Okay, last but not least, Saint Bonaventure. No. What city is named after him? Ventura. So we're in Ventura County. So I think I just kind of add him in real quickly. He was born Giovanni di Fidanza in 13th century, 1221. He was son of a physician, and the story with him, which again has interesting ties everywhere, is that when he was a young boy, he grew very ill, and it was right around the time of Francis of Assisi, and he lived in a similar town. And so St. Francis of Assisi came to heal him. Okay, now again, his name it was Giovanni di Fidanza. But when St. Francis of Assisi came to heal him, and he did, and he recovered because he was deathly ill, his mother cried out, "Oh, what? Oh, buena ventura," which means, "Oh, good fortune." And that's where the name Ventura comes from, which means fortune. At the age of 22, Saint Bonaventure enters the Franciscan order, so he becomes a Franciscan monk. He became very good friends with a couple people. Saint Aquinas, right? Thomas Aquinas. They went to the same, and a guy who would later become king, Saint Louis. So that's the other connection, right? Not the Saint Louis of Obispo, but the Saint Louis of of Missouri. St. Louis of Missouri. At the age of 32, he is chosen to become a general minister for the Franciscan order, which basically spent all his time doing administrative work. In 432, he becomes a bishop, and Pope. No, wrong story. Uh-oh. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Ooh! I'm missing a page. Oh well. He died on July 15th. All right.
So, Albert?
Yes.
In the last few months about a young man that died and that they are talking about canonizing or something.
The technology guy?
Yeah, the technology. Yeah,
Yes, he's.
there's something going on right now.
Oh really?
Yeah.
I didn't read
He's
about
out there
this.
saying that he was a.
He died, he was like 15, died of leukemia, kind of.
Oh, just recently.
Yeah,
But I think he was a master of technology.
Oh, interesting.
so there's like a new saint in the work.
Oh, really? Well, it takes a while because a lot of these, we talked about early on the process of canonization, right? Usually you don't get canonized right away. You have to have that validated miracles. And that's actually a recent thing because early on, as Bill said, right now the two qualifications of becoming saint, you're either martyred or you have to have two verified miracles. But early on, before that system was in place, like Saint Patrick and Saint Nicholas, they're legend stories, and there's no real official canonization dates for them because that wasn't, that process wasn't 10th century, 1000. So that wasn't there. But part of the whole canonization process is.
Coming up to me, and he was already in a glass casket. and people
Oh, really?
died.
So part of the miracles, a lot of the saints that are attributed the miracles are not necessarily during their lifetime that they perform a miracle, but after they are deceased, in the Catholic Church primarily, you would pray for the deceased's intervention, right? They would pray in the name of that person before they become saints. And so a lot of the miracle stories are usually they have either an icon or a relic of the deceased, and by touching that relic, a miraculous healing happens, or something miraculous happens, and that gets attributed to them. In fact, one of the other saints I was reading, I forgot her name, not Elizabeth. It's the first American saint. So the first saint born in the United States, 17th century. But after she died, it's kind of sad. After she died, they cut up her body, and they sent pieces all over.
That was
Yeah. Yeah. So that,
Here and a skull there and a.
yes, the skull goes there, the arm goes here, yeah. Yeah.
When are they venerated? Is that before they're a saint?
That is the sainthood, right? The veneration?
Veneration is the step right before
Yeah.
beatification.
It's part of the process.
It's a part of the process, yeah. So. Anyhow, thank you everyone.